Hey, it's John Acuff, and thanks for watching this resource. I created this for anyone who wants to give a really, really great speech, to give their best speech. When I was working on it, I started it as a PDF because usually that's what I do. I've done a writer's resource, for instance, on how to finish your book, and it's a PDF. That makes sense. I've done one for entrepreneurs on how to charge more money because most entrepreneurs don't charge enough money. But when it came to the speaking one, it felt weird to do it as a paper or digital resource that way. To write about speaking just felt a little odd. And so I thought instead, what if I did it as a video? And not just as a video of me talking one to many, but what if I treated it the way I treat it if you came up to me and said, hey, can we have coffee? And if you didn't say the phrase, can I pick your brain, I probably would have coffee. But I thought, I want it to feel like you and I are sitting down in a coffee shop full of hipsters, and you're asking me questions about, okay, well, I've got this one part, or what's this other thing? And so that was my goal with this. So I asked my good friend Brian Elaine, who I've worked with for years and years and years, we go way back in the blogging world to 2008, to sit down with me and have a conversation about what does it mean to give your best speech ever. So that's the goal of today. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope there's parts that you rewatch. I hope there's some that you take notes on. But I think it's going to be really helpful, and I'm going to do my best to share things I've learned since 2008. That's when I got my first paid speaking gig. I did some free stuff before that, spoke at work a couple times, but it wasn't until 2008 that I really started to make money and be deliberate about the craft of speaking. So what I'll be sharing today is based off of the last 9 or 10 years, and that's my goal. So Brian, thanks for doing this with me. Let's get started.
All right, yeah, I'm honored to be the proxy for all the speakers. I've written down some questions here that I have for you, legitimate questions. As somebody who's done a little bit of speaking before, I'll come up with some more as we're talking. First question, for somebody who's not yet working with a speakers bureau, do you have any advice or best practices for getting paid? Is it typical to demand to get paid before an event, after event? Should you never leave the venue without a check? Have you ever been stiffed before? What are your best practices around getting paid for events?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I want this video to cover not just how to give a speech, but how to get paid to give a speech. Because when you say your best speech ever, it would be amazing if that also included a lot of money. That's so fun. I mean, public speaking professionally is a pinch you kind of job where you go, I can't believe I get to do this. I enjoy it, and then they gave me a check when I was done. There's not a lot of things in life that work that way. You certainly see professional athletes who look like they're having fun and they're getting a lot of money. So, to start with the question of money, Speakers Bureau, to start, you really have to go the free route initially. You have to give free speeches. I know one of my favorite speakers, Rory Vaden, used to speak at nursing homes. And it was smart because nobody else was trying to do that. It's difficult to start at TEDx because they're getting 100 applications. Guess who's not getting 100 applications? A nursing home. And so I love the idea of saying, okay, where are there places in my own community that I can serve, that I can speak, that I can get better? You want to give your best speech, you've got to do repetitions, repetition, repetition. As far as finding a bureau or getting paid first, a lot of times my favorite question, the one that I use that I've taught before, is to ask people what their budget is. When you're first starting speaking, you have a lower sense of value for what you're doing than other people. I remember there was one time I was going to charge somebody $500, and I said, "What's your budget?" And their budget was over $2,000. And instantly, I quadrupled what I was going to be paid for that. So I think you can book yourself that way. As far as getting a bureau, I would find the 5 that you like the most, and then ask them what their process is for representing new speakers. I wouldn't bombard them with your tape or video or information. I would first say, what's the process like? So that they can then say to you, oh, there's 3 steps, and then you can go do those 3 steps. Or they might say to you, hey, you know what? We're not currently accepting any new speakers, but we will be down the road. Please get back in touch with us. You want to get as much information as you can about that process.
And you mentioned that great question about, what is the budget you're working with? Is it a case where whoever throws out a number first is going to lose? Like if they come back to you and say, well, we have a limited budget, or if they're not willing to throw out a number, is it like a game of chicken where you keep pushing them to do it, or at some point do you have to throw a number out there?
No, I mean, at some point you might have to. I mean, if they come back and say, well, what do you typically charge? I think my favorite answer to that question, because I get asked that question, my friend Phil Jones would say, well, what's the event? How many people will be there? When is the event? Like, you ask questions so that you can have a good answer. It's unfair if somebody comes up to you on the street and says, I want to hire you to do a job. You would go, well, what job? Like, if the job is to do something, if it's brain surgery versus like shoveling, you should know. So I think in that situation, I would just keep going back and get more information.
Okay. And is it okay to leave a venue after having spoken without a check in hand? Is that common practice?
No, I mean, no, I never speak somewhere until the money's already come in. That's, okay. No way. Because you're going to fade into the distance. The event's already happened. Like, what's your recourse there? Especially if it's a big client. You can't say, I'm so mad at you. They're going to say, that's adorable. So no, I never. Usually what's typical is they pay half up front and then half right before the gig.
Okay. In terms of what you talk about, I've heard a couple of different theories as to what you should do kind of as a beginning speaker. I've heard some people say just develop one amazing talk that is going to blow people away and just work on it until it's amazing. I've heard other people say, no, you should really have like 3 to 5 different talks in your area of expertise so that you can speak to a few different things. If you had to pick one of those routes, what do you think is more important, nailing down one amazing talk or having a few things you could talk about?
I think a few.
Okay.
I just think when you're getting started, it's so hard that you want to throw out a bigger net. I don't think they have to be 3 amazing right out of the gate. Like, that's intimidating. But if it were me, I think you have 3 or so that even 2 is better than 1. Like, if you said, okay, I'm going to have this one faith-based one and a one corporate-based, or I'm going to have a sales-based speech and a marketing-based speech, or a speech for parents and a speech specifically for moms. Like, you've made your audience exponentially larger. So I just think you have to be, and the other thing is, I would be careful that if you only have one speech, that's a real possibility for perfectionism, for you to think it has to be perfect and to work on it, and never actually kind of ship, as Seth Godin says. So I'd rather you have 2 speeches that are kind of going on at the same time.
Okay. I've noticed on your website you have an example of one of your talks, I think from the World Domination Summit. How important is it for a speaker to have an example on their website? And should that talk be like really good quality or really good? Is there a chance that having something on there could actually be like a negative for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's part of the challenge. I've heard people say, when you control the situation, make sure they mic the audience so that you can hear people are laughing. So World Domination, that was one of my best speeches I've ever given. I loved it. It was so much fun. But you watch the video, and it feels like the crowd is just like dead. Now, the way it was shot is gorgeous. So I think there's a couple factors. You go, is the clip really good? Like, do I feel confident about the quality of what I was doing? Is the video high quality? Does it seem like a legit event? Like, you don't want an event where it's like, you can tell there's 7 people and it's in like a hotel conference room. And I'd much rather you go shorter or even film something. Like, if you said to me, I don't have any good film for me at an event, I would say, pay a videographer in your town. Like, it doesn't have to be expensive, for a 1 3-minute clip, and then stand in the cleanest part of your house and say, hey, I love giving speeches. Like, all it has to do is show you're a real person, you know how to communicate. It doesn't have to be like a 7-camera shoot.
Okay. In terms of preparing for a speech, I know you've written before about standing in hotel rooms in front of mirrors or in front of a window and practicing your speech. Is that something that you only did at the beginning of your career, or is that something that you still do now?
It's something I still do now. I mean, I'm giving a speech Monday morning, so and then in a few days I'm giving a speech, and it's one I've given before, but I'm going to do a smaller version of it. So I know Sunday night I'll probably do it at least once, where I go over it. And my process is simple. Like, when you talk about how do you give your best speech, once I have the speech done, I print out an outline of it, and then I give the whole speech. Now, in some situations, that's easy. It's a 20-minute speech. I can do that twice in a day. Some, if it's like a 90-minute speech, I can't do it multiple times. It's really challenging. So I print it out. I have it in front of me. I set my phone to timer and to not go off. And then I give the whole speech. And I'll pause it at moments to write something new in Sharpie. Like I'm always writing on it in Sharpie. And so then I take those notes and I put them inside a fancier notebook and I bring that on stage. And I might never use it, but you're going to have jokes or ideas or questions come up that you didn't realize, like, oh yeah, that chainsaw story is related to that other one. And you don't want to miss those. And so I always say, like, 90% of the speech is prepared, 10% happens in the moment. Now, I always think, like, the difference between talent and craft is this. So, like, talent to me is saying, okay, in the moment, I thought of a funny joke and I said it. Craft is remembering that joke and calling it back up. So I did that. I remember I was in Charlotte and I did this joke and it was off the cuff and it killed. And I remembered to do it in every other city. Now, it didn't play the same way in every other city because every town is different, but I was proud that I had remembered after the speech to write it down. Part of giving a great speech is constantly honing it and honing it and honing it. So the hour after your speech is really important for you to sit down with your phone or a notebook and say, like, here's some things that happened, here's some things I did. Case in point. So I've given the do-over speech maybe 50 times. And in the do-over speech, I start by telling a story about my kids wanted to get a cat. We can't get a cat because Jenny's allergic. And it's kind of a funny story. So 10 minutes later, I tell a time about when I spoke at Comedy Central, and it just didn't go well. And the client was great. I was just really awkward. I had just changed jobs, so I didn't have a lot of material. Like, it was weird. And Jenny was there, my wife, and she said after, like, that didn't go well. And so I do this joke where I say, like, oh, thanks, that was really helpful. Like, you confirmed it. And I added kind of under my breath, like, we are so getting a cat. Like, we're probably going to get a cat on the way home from the airport. And that was the biggest joke. And
yeah.
I had done the speech 50 times. And that never surfaced until time 51, where it was like, hey, here's a funny joke. And so writing that down and remembering it is critical to giving your best speech.
It's funny. My next question was actually, is there any point in a speech where you kind of stop the editing process and you're just like, you know what, this talk is solid. I'm just going to memorize it. I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to know it back and front, and you stop editing it. But it sounds like you kind of never do.
No, because I think you get bored with it.
Yeah.
Like, I think... you know, and remember, it's not theater. Like, it's weird if somebody in Hamilton goes, I got a couple lines I'm going to add. You'd be like, no, you don't. Like, we wrote an amazing, performance, and you're going to give it. So it's not theater in that sense. So I think it's much more fun for you as the speaker even to ride that kind of like new content creativity wave to see what happens and then to kind of respond to it. So, no, I don't think and that's a good question. Like, is a speech ever done? No. A book is. Like, that's the difference. I mean, there you go. Like, people say, what's the difference between writing a speech and a book? The book is done. Like, I won't give edits on finish a year from now based on things I've learned. But the speech, I don't think is ever done if you want to stay connected to it. And part of it is you see bands do that where they play a different version of their song. Now, your hope is that it's not so different that people don't recognize it. But I think you always continue to kind of work on it.
And you're somebody who likes to work in pop culture references, into social media, into your talks as well. Is that something where you will purposefully say, like, oh, something funny happened in the news, or let me see if I can work this into a talk, or is it more organic usually how it happens?
It depends, but I think the challenge there is to make sure your audience is going to understand it. If you have an older audience, a Jay-Z reference isn't helpful. Now, I will say... Daniel Tosh used to do this. Like, Daniel Tosh, the comedian, used to say, like, he narrows the audience until he has like 4 people laughing at a joke. And I thought that was interesting. And so there's occasional references where I'll know only one person's going to get that. So case in point, this is another example of I gave a speech 50 times and a new thing happened. I have this story about when I worked for Bose, we didn't create colorful headphones. So Beats came out of nowhere and they crushed us. Like, they did really well. And so, I told that story 50 times, and for the first time in a speech, I said, we forgot about Dre, which is a line from an Eminem Dre song from like 10 years ago. And I know 5 people max are going to laugh about that, but they're going to die. Like, they didn't see it coming. Like, and I also know it didn't cost the audience much. I think that's the tension. Like, would I do a minute on a pop culture thing that only 5 people get? No. But a single line that comes out of nowhere, like a sniper bullet, like, people love that and go, what? Like, did he just say Wu-Tang? Or, like, did he, you know? And now I will do wider pop culture. Like, I do this bit where I talk about Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani. Like, that's a weird relationship. Nobody saw No Doubt in the 90s and was like, I bet she marries a guy who wears Wranglers. Like, and so I know that's pretty wide.
Yeah.
But, like, a smaller one, like They Forgot About Dre, is pretty narrow. But the people who get it really get it, and that's worth it.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like a gift to those people, because laughing at that joke and being one of 5 people, you kind of feel like...
You're an insider.
Yes.
Yeah, you're an insider.
Yep. That's great. Have you, in terms of editing a talk, have you ever had a large section of a talk that after a few times you're like, you know what, I just don't think this works, and have you just scrapped that? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I've scrapped an hour section of like a 4-hour talk. Wow. Because I just didn't think it wasn't resonating, and it wasn't what people were like requesting. And so I would give it if I had to. It wasn't bad. It was fine. It just wasn't like I figured out the one that was the superstar. I mean, I love Louis C.K. talks about that with his routines. Like, he's a comedian. He compares his routines to like the folding of a Japanese samurai sword. You know, like the whole thing is they're folding the metal on itself, folding it, getting out all the impurities. And so he's like, I have a speech, and the first part is killer. So I move that to the back. And then the second part has to become killer, or it doesn't get to be in the front. And then once it's killer, I move it to the back. And so eventually, like, he's just continually making one amazing hour. And I think that's where you have to be willing to say, and also, like, it's not for you. Like, just because it's fun to say, if it's not helpful or it's not giving something to the audience, it's not worth it. Like, I always say, you're not there to speak, you're there to serve. And so even if it's a good story you have a fun time telling, if it's not helpful to the audience, and there's times like that where I'll take out a joke because I'm like, nobody got that, nobody liked it, I'm the only one that finds that funny, let me remove that.
Yeah. So let's talk about when you're actually giving the speech, 5, 10, 15 minutes in, depending on how long it is. Are you sort of in the back of your mind taking the temperature of how is this going? Is it going poorly? Is it going great? Should I pivot on anything? Or if you start doing that, is that bad to do? Should you just give what you've prepared to give?
No, I think you should. I think that's part of the magic of giving a speech. Like, part of, I always used to, I love this line that Bill Maher said. Like, Bill Maher and I disagree about like a billion things, but in this documentary about criticism, they said, can you ever turn it off? And he said, no, because to be a comedian, public speaker also, is to be wildly aware of everything that's happening and sensitive to it. So you don't then get to go, except for bad stuff, like you're sensitive to all of it or none of it. And so I know, what I'd caution people is don't take the temperature of the first 30 seconds as how it's going to be for 30 minutes. Like, there's rooms that you have to understand you're not exactly sure what's happened earlier that day. You don't know if that person had a bad morning. You don't know if the first speaker was a jerk. You don't know if the first 4 hours have been really boring. Like, you don't know what's happened. And so sometimes, I mean, I had an event where I stood up and I said my first joke and first story, and it was really flat, but it was just they didn't know if they were allowed to laugh. Like, if it hasn't been funny all day, the first funny is like, wait, is it like, is he serious? Like, I don't, but the reason I say you figure it out is because you can play to that. Like, I did an event recently, it was 8,000 people, and I knew in the first 10 seconds that like I was going to amplify every joke because it was just working, like right out of the gate. And it was working in part because I've poured so much into that. It was an Orange event, and like I do a 15-city tour every fall with them. So by the time it gets to the big one, they've all seen me, we're friends. Like, but I knew right away because I read the room, like, oh, this is going to be amazing, and I'm going to get to ride this wave, and I did, and it was awesome.
Have you ever been in a situation where you expect a laugh at a certain point and then it doesn't come?
Yeah.
And how do you handle that?
I've done a bunch of dental events, and I really like that because dentists, what's fascinating about that industry is they have to be doctors but also entrepreneurs, and they get no entrepreneur training. So like if you ask a dentist, you're now the CEO of a company. How much business training did you get in dental school? They go, 0. So they're in a really interesting position. And I remember I was at some dental event and I said something like mouth science. That's what I called it. And like, I thought they would get a kick out of that. And I think they were insulted and it was dead. And I was just like, so yeah, I thought this will get a laugh, and it died. And you just move on. Like, you move on and you try to get in with the next one. Like, that's all I did was I noted it and was like, oh, all right, like, I didn't mean to be insulting. And I think somebody actually groaned. And I just moved on, you know.
The mouth science joke it's the oldest joke. They're so tired of it.
Apparently.
Let's say, maybe this has even happened to you, but let's say you've got about 20 minutes of material in your talk left, and all of a sudden they flash up that you have 10 minutes left, or some situation where you've got more material than time left. In general, would you try to get through everything you've got just at a faster pace, or would you try to edit on the fly and give your best 10 minutes or your closing 10 minutes, or would you mix the two? How would you handle that?
I would edit on the fly.
Okay.
Like, I would drop out stuff that I didn't think was worth it. And I would say, and it might hurt my feelings, but the audience doesn't know what they missed because they don't know it exists. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're not like, if you've never seen a movie, you don't like, they could edit half of the movie out and you wouldn't know. You know, you could say like, oh, I didn't even know that was missing because I didn't know it existed. So I don't worry about that. I would edit on the fly. I would try to kind of say, what would be the least awkward that I can remove? Like, if you've told a story that the conclusion has to come at the end, you got to tell that part. Like, you have, because you've already set up, they will miss that. Yes. So if your speech is one of those where it's like, I'll tell you the end, you know, what happens, and then you don't tell them, that's unfortunate. But I think for the most part, you go, and you would even if you're showing slides, you could be like, oh, there's something I really want to show you guys. Like, I'm so excited about it, I'm fast forwarding through stuff. Like, you make it seem on purpose.
Okay.
You know, or like, oh, this next idea is perfect for you guys. I want to show it to you. I want to skip ahead. Like, you make it seem like you're doing it on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. But I will say, in 9 years, 10 years of doing this, I've never had an in the moment cut it shorter.
Okay.
I've had before I go on, they say, hey, we're running behind. Will you cut 10 minutes? That happens. But I've seen one happen to a guy, but that was because he didn't ask the right person how much time he had. Like, you want to give your best speech, ask 10 people. Like, even a meeting. That's what the thing I try to get across. Like, some of these get paid for a speaker questions. I get don't apply to you if you're a CEO and you just want to talk, or you're the VP of marketing. But the majority of this conversation applies to anyone that has to talk to anyone. Like, even a one-on-one meeting with your boss when you try to get a raise, that's a paid speaking engagement in a sense. Because you could walk out with $10,000 for how you present why you're worth a raise. Like, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of go back and forth on, it's not, public speaker doesn't mean on stage. It can mean in a meeting. It can mean in a conference room. It can mean in a one-on-one, you know, like catch-up kind of situation, weekly review. So that's why I love doing these things.
One more question about that clock in the back or in the confidence monitor is, how much are you trying to respect that? If you see there's 3 minutes left and you know you've got 5 minutes left, but it's such a good 5 minutes, are you just going to go over and hope that they're fine with that, or are you really trying to respect that clock?
I'm trying to respect it, like, within the minute.
Okay.
People never get mad if you go a little short. They do get mad if you go long.
Okay.
And it's disrespectful. So the event planner already has a stressful job, and if you go over, and you're not famous, like if Peyton Manning goes 20 minutes over, people are like, I can't believe we got, like, he super served us.
Yeah.
If John Acuff does, they're like, that guy would not stop talking, you know? And where, like, if I went 5 minutes under, nobody notices, and they're actually happy to get the 5 minutes back.
Yeah.
So I try to stick within a minute. I mean, that's why I use my phone. Like, I bring my phone up. I always ask for a table so I can put a water. Like, otherwise, your water's on the ground and you're bending over everything. It's awkward. And I put my phone up there so I have a timer, because a lot of times you'll go to a client and they'll be like, oh, we have a clock 1,000 feet away in the dark and it's analog. And it's like, good luck doing the math.
Yeah.
You know?
What's your personal favorite kind of time frame? If a client says to you, you've got this many minutes, and you're like, oh, perfect, I love that time.
I think 45 is nice.
Okay.
Because then you've got like 5-minute intro, 5-minute close, got a lot of time in the middle. I think if it's only one idea, I guess you could do 20 to 30. I don't like when it's really long because I just think a lot of people aren't there to sit that long. I'd rather break it up. It's one thing when it's like, we want to do a 4-hour session, but it's 4 1-hour sessions. That's different than we want you to do 2 90-minute sessions. Like 90 minutes is just a long time to sit still, you know?
Yeah. And do you prefer, do most of your talks that you give have slides or not really? And
yeah,
what do
I
you
would
prefer?
say 90% do.
Yeah.
I mean, the myth is that, or the perception is people hate PowerPoint. No, they don't. They hate bad PowerPoint. Like that's like saying like, I don't know, people hate used cars. No, they hate lemons. Like there's a lot of great used cars. I've bought a used car. And so at my level, what I'm trying to do, they expect slides. Like you get to clients eventually. Now, if you're preaching at a church, it's different. Like most sermons don't have slides. Like they might have fill in the blanks. But at the level I'm trying to be at, I can't show up to Microsoft and just be like, hey, it feels off the cuff. Even the evidence of having the slide shows, okay, something happened before this. This is prepared. Like that helps.
Yep. And do you have some best practices in terms of what you do put on slides? Yeah.
So hire a professional. Like you're not, the problem with some of this in life is that the software is so easy, it tricks us into thinking we can do good, and you can't. Like your slides won't look good. The average PowerPoint has 40 words on it. My average has like 6 to 8. So the rule I always use is strong image that doesn't overpower the statement because the statement's still king. An image that makes sense because sometimes a designer will go like, saw a really cool wave image, and here's this phrase that has nothing to do with a big wave, and you're like, that doesn't. And then I try to only put things on slides that somebody would tweet. So like this phrase is written in a way. So like for instance, I teach about empathy, and I say, read less minds, ask more questions, and that's I would tweet that.
Yeah.
And it's simple and it's clear. Read less minds, ask more questions. 6 words, and I'm out. So yeah, that. But I love and have less than you think. Now somebody would say, well, what if I have information I have to present because it's been inherited? Well, you can still have a good image. You can still, like if they give you a 50-word mission statement, I still would break that into multiple slides. Like I still would go like 10, like I would make it build and I'd be dramatic about it. I think one of the mistakes people make too with slides is they don't sell them hard enough. So like when I had a picture of my kids, they had painted their faces blue, like with makeup, and they look crazy. And so I sell the heck out of that. Or I had my youngest daughter wrote a letter to Michelle Obama because she wanted her to stop school lunch, like messing with school lunch. So like I sell that hard. I've seen speakers that are like, oh, hey, here's this time I met Bono. And it's like there's no setup, and they miss all the impact of that. So I think you have to sell the slide.
And do you think you've talked about this a little bit, I think even on the speakers list, but you think it's maybe a little wasteful to start your talk off by saying, hey, here's my name and here's my family, and is that kind of a waste? And
pastors hate hearing this. Pastors are the worst at this. Like, because the church I go to, we have other campuses, and so they come out and they go, I want to say hi to Bellevue and Dixon and Franklin and online. And now we do a service inside jail. So now they're like, and if you're in prison, like, and like, it just feels eventually like they're like, and if you survive the zombie apocalypse and are watching this on a data chip, get to high ground. And so this isn't my idea. Like a ton of speaking books talk about the first minute, the last minute really matter. Your first minute should be a powerful story. It should be about engagement. You can still do all the stuff in the middle that you want. Like you can still in the middle say, hey, I'm so happy I get to share these ideas with all these different campuses. You can still say, I'm honored to be here. A lot of people reintroduce themselves. More than likely, when you get up to speak, the guy before you will have just said, ladies and gentlemen, Jill Smith. Like, it's not like you came out of a cloud. Like, they know who you are. It's weird to reintroduce yourself.
And do you think that same idea of the importance of the first minute applies not just to the person on stage, but maybe to the person in the conference room, giving a presentation to the 12 managers.
100%. Like, I don't think you have to be over dramatic. Like, that's the tension. Like, we've all had somebody whose drama level was higher than the room, and you're like, oh, that was awkward. But if I was giving a conference, say I was, when I worked at Bose, we partnered with Porsche to put Bose sound systems in Porsche. And that's awesome. So I might have started with, this is what a 911 sounds like. I might have opened with that. And and why would I have said that? I'd say, so sound is half of driving a Porsche, and we're about to amplify that. And then you start, then you can go into here's the system and it's got this many watts, but I would still start with something that's, I would still come out and say, a Porsche isn't a car, it's a rocket ship that's legal. And then kind of go on and versus saying, it's so great to be here, here's where we're going to go today, I'm going to show you these 3 things. That's just boring.
Yeah. Back to something that sometimes happens during talks. When you experience audio issues, do you kind of have a rule of thumb in terms of, do you try to power through it, or at some point do you have to make a big deal out of it? Do you try not to throw the sound people under the bus? Have you have any stories about that?
Yeah, I mean, in Vegas recently, I had to get a handheld. My headset system wasn't working, so I just had to, in the middle, get a handheld.
And did you ask for that, or did they bring it up to you?
I said, hey, is the sound okay to you guys? And everybody's like, no. And so I got a handheld. So you have to know, you have to be prepared that it might be a handheld. It might be, And so that was one of them. But I always I'll tell a joke about sound guys to kind of distract if it's big enough. So I remember Andy Andrews, who's really talented at speaking. I mean, he's been doing this for 50 years. He says that he likes to have kind of a list of things to do if something goes wrong. So he's prepared.
Okay.
So if something goes wrong with the sound, he has, these are my 3 options. So one of mine is I do a joke about how people judge the sound guy. They're invisible until the sound doesn't work. And then everybody's like, why do you hate us so much? And they all look at him. So I'll joke about that. But then you just have to be flexible. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, you do your best to make sure the mic is on and has fresh batteries. I'm a maniac about fresh batteries. You don't want somebody have to come up and change your battery pack on your butt at minute 20,
Yeah.
So,
and ultimately, I guess in those situations, if you keep remembering that you're there to serve the audience, you're going to do what's best for the audience in that situation. So
if they can't hear, my comfort level doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Do I like handhelds? It's not my favorite. I like to talk with my hands and I like having a headpiece, but if it's not working, then okay, let me do this other version.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about after the speech. Is there anything that you do kind of every single time afterwards in terms of, I know you mentioned maybe taking some notes sometimes if a good moment of inspiration came to you, but what about with the client? Do you always follow up with the client? Are you trying to get quotes from them if you feel like it went well? How do you handle that? Yeah,
I mean, there's thank you notes. I just ordered a new batch of thank you notes that are based on finish so that they're on brand.
Okay.
So I did that. There's also, it depends on the client. I'll send clients, I sent them a bag. I have this bag I love by this company, Tom Bin, BIHN. And if you're a client, and I gave one to this client that's just the other day, 4 speeches had come off of this one event, 4 new clients. So it was a $250 bag, but based on what that gig that he gave me earned me, that was a drop in the bucket. And so if it's appropriate, I'll send something if we've had a conversation, especially if there's only one person. Say me and the client, and it was a great gig, had a talk about running and running playlists. I'm not maybe I'll send you $100 pair of Bose headphones and go hey, it was so much fun. It's fun to be kind to people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I've done that, so now you should book me again. But I am saying that's enjoyable when people send you that's just fun, and you remember that person. The other thing I'm trying to do is look at my clients for speaking as my best clients, my most important clients, in that they're the bottom of the funnel. Somebody who bought a book has bought a $15 book. Somebody hired me your speech, it's way more than $15.
Yeah.
So I want to put them on a list and be very deliberate that every time I release a book, they get a free copy, and they get I want to put them on a list where every Christmas they get a Christmas card. Like, I want to treat them like a customer base. It's so easy. The first couple of years of my career, I'd be like, all right, see you later. Like, and they would just fade off into the fog. So I try to stay. And then there's the flip side of that too, is how do you communicate with the audience after? Like, have you done a slide or a text-in number, something to give them content where you're being generous even after? And so a lot of times I'll try to use an email capture where I can send the thing I created to 100 people.
In terms of getting feedback from people that have brought you in, testimonials are one thing. They're almost easier to get on your website maybe for a new speaker than a video. Is it okay to follow up with all your clients and ask them for a quote?
Yeah, if it went well, definitely.
Yeah.
If it went well, like, even mention it in the moment, like when everybody's high on the moment.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like, the people are busy. So I don't, like, when a client doesn't, I don't think, oh, they didn't like me. I just think they're human and they've moved on. Like, they have other stuff going on today. That was like, that they didn't give me a quote isn't about me. It's about, like, they got a busy life. I can respect that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to get it in the moment, or email them and say, hey, and when you do, you send examples of what other people have said, because then they don't have to start from scratch.
And what about, a lot of times when people bring you in, they will maybe hope for some extra time with you, whether that's hanging at the venue for an hour and talking, or maybe it's asking you out for a drink or asking you out for dinner with the team. Do you kind of have boundaries around that? How do you handle those situations?
Well, I think there's two things in regards to that. One is you do a lot of upfront work. Like, if you want to create the best speech ever, know the client better than you think you should. Like, you should, one of the keys to doing the best speech ever is to know who's in the audience and what they need to hear. We've seen that over and over. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, we talked about it's hard to serve a general audience. It's easy to serve a specific audience. If we understand what they need, then we can fulfill that need, and that serves them even better. So whether that's going on Facebook and saying, hey, I'm talking to a group of parents next week about social media. If you're a parent, what are your questions? You'll get real people that tell you real things versus you in a room trying to imagine. So I would say, like, the client relationship starts at the beginning with calling the client, asking them questions, asking their audience questions. If you're going to go speak to a group of dentists, ask your dentist questions. Like, you have to upfront serve them like crazy. As far as on site, you just have to balance your time. Zig Ziglar, obviously amazingly famous speaker, told me, if you need to run before an event, if you need to rest before an event, if you need to read before an event, block that time. Because a client, out of wanting to serve you, will say, hey, well, you're new, you'll be alone in town. We'll take you out to dinner with the CEO the night before. And that gig is harder than the actual speech. Like, sitting at a table with two people you've never met, and one of them's a CEO, and you're performing. And the problem there is you'll exhaust yourself before the thing they hired you to do. And so that's that's part of the tension of being a speaker, is learning how to go, oh, that's so great, but I really need to get in my zone, so I'm not going to be able to do this, this, and this.
Before we wrap up here, let's go back to people who maybe want to get a start at this. They've done it once, twice, 3 times. They really enjoyed it. I heard somebody tell a new speaker once, like, before you concentrate on your craft of trying to be a better speaker, you need to have a burden for somebody. You need to have a burden for parents, or for youth, or for business people. How much truth do you think there is to that? Or is it okay to just really enjoy public speaking and want to try to make a career out of it?
I think it's fine to just really enjoy public speaking. I mean, I think the more you do it, the bigger burden you get. It's hard to have a burden for someone you haven't met. So if I you should have a burden for the idea too. I guess I go back to, like, another form of performing. Like, does Michael Jordan have a burden for people sitting in the audience? Like, no, like, he loves to dunk. Like,
right.
And he's gonna, like, and so I think you develop a burden, but I don't, if you said to me, I think that for me, like, with finish, I have a burden for people who don't finish. Because, like, it legitimately bothers me that 90% of Americans want to write a book and less than 1% do. Like, I've been a bottled up writer. That stinks. So right. I have a burden for them. But I think there's this false nobility of, like, you have to have a burning burden until you step, like until you do, you can't step on stage. Like, I mean, there's a lot of audiences where like, you go in to give the speech because you're hired to give the speech. You have to find a connection point. Like I always, my friend Lanny Donahoe was like, you have to think like your kid is in the back row of that audience and it's the last time you get to tell them something. How would you do that? So I think you have to be connected. If you're just like a mercenary and you're not connected to the audience, they can feel that.
And one last thing too, I know you've talked before about humor and how everybody loves a good joke in a speech, but maybe it's not always a good idea to put that in.
Yeah, and can you hear the banging right now? We're getting our house renovated. Oh, nice. Speaking of like things that happen in the middle of a speech, I've had helicopters go over, and I'll make a comment. But no, I always when people say, "Do I have to be funny?" I say you have to be honest. Okay. So if you're be as funny as you'd be at a dinner table, like at a dinner party. Like if you like to do dry jokes, then do those. Like if you're kind of a physical kind of person, like do that. I just think it's bad when somebody reads a book about speaking that's like, oh, I have to have an anecdote. And so they come up with like a story about a cat, or like the worst, or where it's like a story they've read in some book about stories and it's not their story. They're like, and they tell you this yarn, like where it's like, oh, and then they just transition into their content because it wasn't authentically who they were. Like nobody, like very few people would go like, Malcolm Gladwell's hilarious, but he's funny in his speeches.
Right.
Like, because he's being Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah. Like, his first strength isn't that. Like, Jim Collins is funny in his speeches. Is he like a comedian? Like, no, that's not. And so I like to do jokes that I would do regardless of if I was on stage. So I would tell somebody, my neighbor, like, dude, that's crazy what just happened. Like I'm working on a bit right now about how disappointing, like, you have a problem with Netflix when you're disappointed and find a new show, and there's only one season. You're like, it's garbage. Like, I need 4 full seasons, 22 episodes. But Netflix keeps launching these, like, whole season, and it's 7 episodes. And you're like, that's not a whole season. Like,
right.
Like, that indicates something weird about us, where we're like, I need 92 hours of content, or I'm not even going to start. And I know people who wait. They wait until they've stacked up, and then they're like, can really tuck into this. So like I would tell that to my neighbor Chris, so I'll tell that on stage.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think you have to be funny. I think it helps. I think it really does. I don't think you have to be dramatic if you're not naturally dramatic. I don't think you have to be emotional if you're not naturally emotional. Like, I think you should be who you are. I think that's what people respond to.
That depletes all my questions. You did a great job answering them.
That was fun. Hopefully this is helpful to people. I write about this exact kind of thing every week on acuff.me/speakers. We'll put that URL up on this video. But it's just once a week I share ideas like the ones we talked about today. So hopefully this is helpful. I think public speaking is one of the best things in the world. You're like a rock star, but you don't have to jam a guitar in the carry space on an airplane. So that's pretty awesome. So it's fun. I hope you have fun with it. I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, John.